Is understanding anatomy so important in your physical education curriculum, and why you and everyone else should understand muscle anatomy? Well, it helps prevent injuries, helps us to train properly, and it guides us on a lifelong wellness, health, and fitness journey. What do we mean? Well, let's go over our sits muscles today to help us understand that. Our sits muscles are SITS, supraspinatus, right here, the superior muscle above the spine of the scapula, helpful in anatomy to understand your terminology. The infraspinatus, the inferior muscle below the spine of the scapula. The teres minor, the smaller of the two tereses, teres major, teres minor, minor being smaller, just like your gluteus maximus versus your gluteus medius and minimus. Which ones do you think are the bigger of them? Okay, understanding terminology is important. But then we also have the subscapularis, sub meaning below, the scapula. It sits in between the rib cage and the scapula and runs right in the middle. So it's in between the rib cage and the scapula. All right, subscapularis. All right, so supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, collectively known as the rotator cuff muscle. We tend to hear a lot of the news about people hurting their rotator cuff. Some people call it rotator cup because they're not necessarily listening correctly. Also important why it's so important to valuable to learn your muscle anatomy so that we understand these things. All right, so the rotator cuff is mostly responsible for preventing the dislocation of the shoulder during overhead movements. So if I am throwing the rotator cuff behind my shoulder, keeps it from dislocating in that position. That's why pitchers in baseball tend to be the most common people who injure their rotator cuff. You can also have volleyball. To some degree, you can have tennis, but they don't do a whole lot of serving overhead smashes and stuff like that. They do a lot, but not as much as baseball pitchers who are constantly doing it. Softball is a safer sport for pitchers because they're going under, right? But you do have throwing motions in softball, so also at risk for rotator cuff injuries. Now, if we are preventing that movement, we strengthen by doing the opposite. External rotation, some medial rotation, also known as internal rotation. Another reason why learning your anatomy is so important. If you understand the roles of the muscle, you can strengthen and prevent injuries by doing those actions. Everyone should understand what your muscles are responsible for, because then we can program our workouts to help us be our best. If we know what the joint movements are for each joint, if we know what the muscle roles of each muscle, we can take those together, marry them, and create the safest, best, most effective workout program. However, that means learning your anatomy is very valuable. Every student in physical education should learn muscle anatomy and joint anatomy. It helps you out in your life. Why? Because preventing injuries, helping your muscles perform, and creating the most effective programs to marry health, fitness, and wellness, injury prevention. All right? So, sits muscles today: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, collectively known as your rotator cuff, responsible for preventing dislocation of your shoulder during overhead movements. We strengthen through internal and external rotations, a little bit of shoulder extension, and we take those accordingly. Now, most of the time we do this through what we consider shoulder warm-up movements, because we do a lightweight with your external rotations. All right? So take this information, use it accordingly, and hopefully your physical education curriculum is including anatomy in it as well.